And now I am privileged to be joined by a veteran journalist, a great Catholic commentator, the author of The Political Pope, George Neumayr, who was also present for the public presentation of the grand jury hearing regarding sex abuse in the Catholic Church just a couple of days ago. First of all, thank you very much for the good work you do and for joining us, George.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Well, I was really intrigued. First of all, thank you so much for your coverage. Your coverage has been above and beyond. You live tweeted the event, and you were actually present for the presentation in Harrisburg. But also, some of your thoughts from a Catholic perspective afterwards really are valuable insights, and I think that they're unlikely to get coverage anywhere else. Let's start with, if I may, your thoughts about the presentation itself of the grand jury report and how some information that could be very pertinent to solving this crisis might have not gotten much prominence in the way that it was presented.
Right. Josh Shapiro, who is the Attorney General for Pennsylvania, he presented the report, and he's a Democrat who's supported by the LGBT community.
Right.
And what I immediately noticed when I sat down at the press conference was that almost everybody behind him, all the victims behind him, were women.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we know that most of the victims listed in the report or enumerated in the report were not women but boys. You know, most of the victims were boys.
Right.
And yet the composition of the victims' dais was largely female.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think Shapiro was trying to confuse people a bit, and I don't think he wants to project the image that this scandal is a byproduct of the gay mafia problem in the church. I think he doesn't want to present that side of the problem, and so I think that's why he selected so many women to stand behind him.
Right, and maybe perhaps, I guess, to play off maybe some of the Me Too movement, this is all something, this way of presenting it is the optimal way to make it mesh with sort of mainstream, ineffectual, as it happens, feminism and anti-sexual harassment campaigning in a way that really doesn't relate in any way that really has good purchase to the actual crisis in the church. I think. That's my opinion. I think that's, and the thing is, I like to back up from this kind of stuff and say, hey, look, were I not a Roman Catholic, but I basically had a conscience, and I wanted to approach this ethically, what would I have in mind? And even then, there's a great case to be made for recognizing the almost all homosexual nature of the predation that's been going on.
Yeah, that's right. And I think in a way Shapiro is playing to his base, which is, as you say, largely feminist, but it's also largely LGBT driven.
Yeah.
And they don't want they don't want to delve into the gay mafia problem in the Catholic Church, and they don't want to see this as the product of a deeply sick gay culture in the church. They would rather see this as a misuse of power by a conservative institution, which adversely affects women. Mm-hmm. And so I suspect that's the reason why he had an almost all female composition behind him.
Well, it's so.
He's running for governor.
He's running.
Everybody says Shapiro. He's using this as an entree to run for governor, mm-hmm. And so that I think is a factor here.
Yeah.
He wants to be governor of Pennsylvania.
Right, and you wouldn't want to do this. And here's the thing, is that essentially what is happening in his case, it sounds like, but what will also happen in media, and I'm very worried about this, because I'm concerned primarily for victims and potential victims. I'm very worried that already this scandal is being strenuously confined to the narratives that actually gave rise to it in the first place. And a lot of that had to do with saying, well, as I pointed out actually in a recent video, it reminds me of the Rotherham rapes. You remember the mass rapes in Rotherham, England? In that case, the political correctness involved was that local law enforcement ignored all the signs and allowed a rape gang to continue in operation for a grotesque amount of time, resulting in the rape of some 1,400 local girls in Rotherham, because they didn't want to appear racist, toward the Pakistani rape gang. Similarly,
Right.
I worry that if our primary concern is not appearing homophobic, in a scandal that, by the way, is taking place in the almost all-male environment of the altar, the seminary, and the priesthood, well, then we're going to be operating really at odds with the interests of victims, wouldn't you think?
Right. Yeah. And yeah, you can't solve a problem if you're not defining it precisely. And obviously, 80% or more of these cases involve boys. And so whether, Shapiro likes it or not, this is a reflection of the pervasive gay priesthood problem in the Catholic Church. And that problem won't be solved. This crisis won't be eliminated until the gay priesthood is eliminated from the Catholic Church. Almost all of the cases involve boys who are 16, 17, 15. It does not, most of the cases do not involve 8-year-old girls.
Right. And then the other thing is that this whole presentation, this whole grand jury report, admirable as it is, and thank God it happened. I mean, this is a good thing. And I'm by no means saying, oh, my goodness, it's not good enough, and complaining about it, because it's a tremendous coup on behalf of victims. So I'm glad it came out. But it is also true that, am I correct in thinking that this report is exclusively about legal minors, correct? They didn't draw
That's right. Yeah.
They didn't draw from adult cases. And when we're talking about Cardinal McCarrick and that scandal, overwhelmingly the majority of what he was accused of was actually the molestation and sexual harassment of adult males.
Right. Right.
And
in fact,
sorry, go ahead.
I was in Harrisburg this morning, and I totally accidentally, one of the victims, and I won't give the name of the victim,
Mm-hmm.
but this person was telling me about the grand jury process, and this person was saying that the Shapiro did not want to address he didn't want to address the moral dimension of this problem. So he didn't want to examine the problem of all these bishops living double lives. And yet this victim was telling me that it was precisely that aspect of the problem, that culture of double dealing, double living by the top prelates, that contributed to their soft approach to pederasty, because they were violating their own vows. They were loath to punish pederasts for violating their vows.
Right.
That's what this victim said to me. And he said, actually, they heard the grand jury was weighing some of these stories about bishops like Worrell and McCarrick, and not McCarrick, but Worrell, and some of these other guys, Zubik, because there are tremendous rumors that are swirling around these figures, which go to whether or not they've observed their own vow of chastity.
Right. Now, what would be your assessment of the prospects for viewers who are obviously concerned both about the church and about victims and about potential victims? A lot of people have been writing and talking to me about their sons. Well, two things. They talk about losing their faith, right? They're afraid of losing their faith. And secondly, they're afraid of sending their sons into the seminaries or allowing their sons to really spend much time with priests. That's how profoundly their trust has been tested. Going forward, what do you think it would take for the resolutions to these crises to include clear-headed, unapologetic thinking that isn't snagging itself in political correctness, especially with regard to homosexuality? And are there any prospects of that happening at all?
Well, it certainly isn't going to happen. It won't happen if the bishops and the cardinals select the investigative panel, the membership of the investigative panel, because they'll just select defenders of the gay mafia. They'll if this is just the gay mafia investigating itself, it will be absolutely useless, and it will end up. It'll be like the way the bishops received that John Jay report.
Right.
Even though the John Jay report said that 80% of the victims were male teens.
Yeah.
The bishops took that report and they twisted it, and they twisted it in a way that prevented people from seeing the important conclusion that it was leading to, which is that the church has a tremendous gay priesthood problem, and the bishop didn't want people to see that conclusion, and so they obfuscated that report. And they'll
Yeah.
do the same thing with this investigative panel if it's ever even assembled.
Right. This is the equivalent. I mean, it's almost like imagine the reverse. If there's a mass Me Too movement moment in Hollywood, and the main response is, let's not talk at all about toxic masculinity, or about male desires for women that can get out of hand. Why ignore something so obviously involved?
Or let's investigate the problem, but we can never talk about directors who exploit actresses.
Well, yeah,
You know,
right.
that's the equivalent of this situation where
Right.
where the gay mafia is basically saying this is not a gay problem, it's a power problem. Didn't Supich in Chicago, Cardinal Supich, didn't he say something like this is just a misuse of power problem?
I'm hearing.
And I see that that's become a meme.
Yeah, no,
I'm sorry.
I'm
You're
hearing.
saying?
Yeah, no, I'm hearing that from every direction. And I'll tell you what. Speaking of the John Jay report and of the problem in the church of going really, bending over backwards on behalf of homosexual activity, which is itself condemned by the church as sinful in the first place, rather than on behalf of the victims of homosexual abuse. My wife recently, at a former parish, taught Sunday school, and of course they do training for child safety. And she said, yeah, we talked about the John Jay report. I just learned about the John Jay report. And the main point of our training was to really emphasize how homosexuality has nothing to do with any of this. Why even bring it up? Come on. I mean, it's almost like more important to these people than victims.
Right.
But anyway, well,
and have you noticed?
Go ahead.
Have you noticed that the bishops like Cardinal Wuerl, Supich, O'Malley, Dolan, they're all giving interviews to publications that promote gay rights, like America Magazine, National Catholic Reporter. So, here they are presenting themselves as solvers of the problem while talking to publications that have spread that specialize in spreading the problem and that have been lobbying for the infiltration of the homosexual movement into the Catholic Church for decades.
Right.
So that just tells you how hopeless it is to think that these guys could actually address this problem successfully.
I wonder if I could ask you one more question, if you have a minute.
Sure.
Okay. What do you think of Bishop Robert Barron? Recently wrote a column about the McCarrick scandal, and he suggested an almost all lay group be responsible for adjudicating the scandal, but he suggested that lay investigatory body be appointed by the Vatican. Now, you mentioned earlier that this is not going to go well if we entrust this convening this group of investigators to the bishops. What do you think the chances? What would it look like if the Vatican were responsible, in your opinion?
Once again, it's the problem of the fox guarding the hen house.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you can have the fox determining the composition of the hen house protection committee. And the fact is, there are a lot of foxes at the Vatican. You can see that in the fact that the ecclesiastical head of the Vatican Bank is a notorious homosexual, Monsignor Rica, who, I don't know if you remember that scandal. Sandro Magister, the veteran Vatican correspondent, had established beyond any reasonable doubt that Rica had a very scandalous homosexual past. He was found one time by firemen trapped in an elevator with a young male prostitute,
mm-hmm.
and Magister reported all this, but Pope Francis didn't care, and he made Rica the ecclesiastical head of the Vatican Bank, and it was actually Rica that occasioned that Pope Francis's signature line, "Who am I to judge?" That was in reference to his gay ecclesiastical head of the Vatican Bank, who, by the way, works with Donald Wuerl. Donald Wuerl has been immersed in the affairs of the Vatican Bank for many years, and Donald Wuerl is on the patrimony of the Holy See, and so he's working with Rica all the time, as did McCarrick, by the way. So I would actually say if a true investigative panel is ever formed, it should look at the relationships between Rica, McCarrick, and Wuerl, Because if you look at the money in the church, if you look at the money men in the church, many of those guys are charter members of the gay mafia. So if you follow the money, you're going to find the fingerprints on the money will be the fingerprints of the biggest double living prelates in the gay mafia. You know, like take for example the Papal Foundation, which McCarrick founded. He was one of the founders of this group called the Papal Foundation. And incidentally, in the Pennsylvania grand jury report, one of the past directors of the Papal Foundation was named as a molester. And the Papal Foundation itself is based in Pennsylvania. And so there are all these overlapping connections, which should tell people that if they follow the money, that will, you know, if they look at who's doing the fundraising, you know, who's holding the hands of the dying widows, you know, and getting millions of dollars out of them. Those are the guys, charter members of the gay mafia, and they've been protecting each other for decades.
Right. And for our viewers who aren't familiar, the phrase gay mafia, hot button as it sounds, is actually a fairly mainstream phrase among Catholic commentators. It is actually a phrase that has been used by the Pope himself in answer to questions about it. And so if you're interested in that, you can look more into it, find this information for yourself. Like George says, follow the money. And before you stop at absolute incredulity at the ugliness of all of this, actually do some research. Do. So, thank you very much, George, for all of the research you do, all the reportage you do, and try to keep your chin up, and we will too.
I will. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.